This here is a raglan sleeve. You can really tell because I've used a different fabric. You've got this shape on the armhole. The sleeve goes all the way up here to the neckline. Today we're going to see how you can make this bigger if you need a full bicep adjustment. Practical as always. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing, and today I have a fitting video for you. This falls right into my ongoing fitting series I have on the channel about this type of garment that goes on your upper half. We've covered a lot of topics. The playlist for this mini series is growing all the time. I suggest you start from the beginning if you are newer to fitting because it will just give you a better idea and overview. I've tried to cover the basic steps first. As the series progresses and the time goes by, I'm sort of deep diving into more specific topics. A little while back, you would have seen already a video about full bicep adjustment and narrow bicep adjustments on the channel. That was in the context of a set-in sleeve, which is different to a raglan sleeve. With a regular pattern, you would have a front and a back that reaches up to the shoulder joint. You would have the shoulders be part of the front and the back pattern piece, and then a regular setting sleeve. And the way that you do the bicep adjustment there is done in a specific way for that shape. If you don't know anything about bicep adjustments, go ahead and watch that video because I go into more of the theory about the ease, how much ease you want, why you would want more ease, also about realistic expectations about your movement with setting sleeves or woven sleeves and knit sleeves. So I'm not going to repeat all of that general content here again. What I'm doing here is going into the raglan sleeve. So same concepts about fitting and ease and all of that apply. It's just that the way you make the sleeve a little larger is a little different because the sleeve has a little bit of a different shape. I also want to point out that making a bicep larger on a sleeve is not an adjustment I do very frequently at all. I can count with my hand the amount of times I've needed to do that over the last couple of years. And I know which brands draft for a smaller arm in general as a base. So it's not something I'm doing all the time. Of course, I know how to do it. This is a sewing channel, so I want general content here for everyone, not just about what I need. So that's why I've decided to make these bicep adjustment videos. The previous one about the set-in sleeve, and now this time about the raglan sleeve. But I would consider it in two scenarios. One where the design of the sleeve is meant to be really fitted, like this one. If that was combined with a fabric choice where the vertical stretch of the sleeve was minimal, I think that combination of a fitted design plus a knit that doesn't have much vertical stretch is going to end up with a sensation that your sleeve is tighter than it should be. In that scenario where those two aspects are combined, I would consider doing a bicep adjustment. In this case, for this stretch lace, that is what's going on here. Stretch lace, the majority, at least the type that I have in my collection, only stretches horizontally. That's fine if you're sewing knit styles that have a little bit of positive ease, but I feel in this particular sleeve for this pattern, it does feel a little bit fitted. So if I were to replicate this type of garment again, where the body here stretches vertically and horizontally like it should, but the sleeves don't, I would consider adding 1/2 inch right here. I usually sew my raglan patterns with the same fabric. This is an exception. Always remember that if your pattern recommends knits that stretch vertically and horizontally, it's better to follow that instruction. You're going to be much happier with the result rather than straying away from the instruction like I did here. I just wanted this look, and it's not like I can't wear it, I'm so uncomfortable. No, I can wear it, it's okay, I can be like this the whole day. But I know it would be nicer if I had a little bit more space over here, and maybe 1/2 inch would suffice. We are going to see how to adjust two types of raglan sleeve. One is a one-piece sleeve, which is your typical sleeve, like this one. It's just one piece, front armhole, back armhole. Up here it involves a neckline and it would just be one piece. The other type of sleeve you'll mainly find for jackets, maybe some shirts, where your sleeve will have two pieces instead of one. So you will have a seam going down this area right here. So we're going to see the two scenarios. One thing I want to touch on before we go into the nitty gritty is about a shoulder dart. On some patterns you will see a shoulder dart right here. As you can see, we have a slope here on the shoulder. Some of us have shoulders that are a little more squared or higher up. Some have a shoulder that slopes a little more. That's quite individual to you, your background, genetics, maybe you've done sports, sometimes it's a postural thing, but we all have a different type of slope here. And sometimes a raglan sleeve can get away with not having that shoulder dart to give the shape when it's for a knit and it's a fitted garment like this one. This is the Rockford Raglan from Love Notions. You can see it's a nice fitted sleeve. It's supposed to be like that. There will be a little bit of negative ease on this area, and because the fabric stretches, the fabric itself will conform to this shape right here without needing a dart. You can see clearly here I just have the stretch lace, nothing else. This is why I'm wearing this top, because you can clearly see the difference between the body and the sleeve. Otherwise it would be hard to see. You would have seen my Islara's top recently on the channel. It's a raglan top from It's to Stitch for Knits. This is a print, so it's harder to see, but the seam goes right there. And on this curve, there is a dart right there. It's a small dart, but just enough to give it the shape that you need so it fits well. This particular dart goes right up to there, and from the widest part of the dart, it's partially covered by a facing inside. That's just the way the neckline is finished here. But if this was a top that was finished with a neckband, instead you would see more of the dart there. You can find that shoulder dart anywhere, both on woven and knit styles. Mainly on woven styles, some knit styles. The patterns that won't have a dart will 100% be for knit fabrics. What you're seeing on screen is the Castillo cardigan from It's to Stitch. And this one is designed to have a little bit more ease. It's a cardigan, it's not that fitted. And because it's not that fitted, it does need that shape on the shoulder. I have it on the other way around so you can see the seams. You can see the front seam there. You can see the back seam over here, and right there you can see the dart. So this is designed for knits, and it does have that shape there. It is necessary for it to be there so that we get this nice shape on the shoulder. Just reaches up to there, it doesn't go past that. You are adjusting down below here, so whether you have this dart there or not is not going to really affect your adjustment. For raglan sleeves in wovens, you just cannot get away with not having a dart or some shaping right here. It just won't fit. You have something straight going up like that. Now I have made a few raglan woven tops that don't have a dart, where the design is supposed to have gathers all around the neckline, and then that dart that would be there would be transformed into neckline gathers instead. That would just be a dart equivalent. To give shape to this area, there has to be some type of pleat, dart or gather. There has to be something there. All I'm trying to say is on a single sleeve, you might find the dart there or you might not find the dart there. It's not going to affect the way that you adjust for a larger bicep, which occurs down below. Here we have a raglan sleeve. Now this specific one has a shoulder dart there. You might find a shoulder dart in some knit designs. Usually knit designs don't have a shoulder dart, but you can find some that do. Most woven designs will have a shoulder dart. Otherwise, there's no way that could fit your shoulder properly with the curve. With a knit fabric, you can get away with not having that dart there because you rely on negative ease to go around the area of the body. In any case, the adjustment to make the bicep and this area larger is not going to affect that dart on there. So you can basically ignore it if you want to. Now, what you want to do is draw a vertical line down the center of the sleeve. One easy way is just to fold it in half at the bottom and make a little crease, and then just go ahead and mark that line all the way up to the top. I have a gray line arrow here on this sleeve piece. This could be placed anywhere on the pattern. It could be here, it could be near the center, but don't take that as a reference in case it's close to the center, because it might not be exactly in the center. At the bottom of the sleeve, you're going to have a hem allowance, and that is going to be a pivot point in the case that you only want to add width to this area of the sleeve while keeping the fit around here the same. In the case that you have a larger bicep and a larger forearm, you might just want to extend the amount you added all the way down to here, and then you wouldn't have a pivot point. So that's up to you and what you think is best for your fitting. A very important part of the process is to draw in your seam lines. So whatever seam allowance your pattern uses, you need to draw that in so you can see it. All the little lines that we're going to be cutting into, we're going to be pivoting in some of these seam lines so that we don't affect the total length of these areas and these areas. So you need to draw that seam allowance in. I've drawn it with a blue dash line there. This is the widest part of the sleeve, and that would be the area that you want to increase. So from the intersection of seam allowance to there, from one side to the other, you want to draw a horizontal line. It's going to be perpendicular to this other line that we drew here. So if you were to measure angles, you would have 90-degree angles right there. Up to this point, it's very similar to what you would do with a regular setting sleeve for a bicep adjustment. It's just that for a regular setting sleeve, it would look shorter here because you would have a separate shoulder seam. Raglan sleeves sort of include the shoulder. That's why this looks so high, and it wouldn't be correct cut all the way up to the top. We're going to take this height right here from this line up to the top and just divided in half approximately. This point here are going to be pivot points, same as this one and that one. What we need to do now is from this point, draw up to there, a diagonal line on both sides. Now we're going to do some cutting. I'm going to start from that point there because that's going to be a pivot point. So I'm going to cut from the edge up to the dot and then start at the dot cutting up, but I need a little bit of paper pivot there, and I'm going to go up, go there, stop there, and then go up this line up to there. Then the same on the other side. These are pivot points, so you want to cut from the edge of the paper up to your dot, but you still need a little bit of paper there, so it's like a little hinge. And over here as well, might as well cut into this one too, right there and right here. It's just a lot of cutting up to do, but it'll make sense. And now we cut from here up to the side. I'm gonna leave the sleeve in this direction because it's just easier to film. Now with all these little hinge pivot points, we are going to be able to move this around, and this is the area where we want to add a width that we need. Let's say we want to add the maximum I would be comfortable with, 1 inch right here. You can see my cutting board underneath. In order for that to happen, we're going to have some overlaps happening here. So this is how it's going to look. That is the inch extra. I'm going to lift this so you can see this is the area where we increased 1 inch. This is the maximum amount I would want to increase in this method. Remember, any method like this where all these overlaps are going to happen, it's just going to make this area a little bit shorter. The hem is not straight like it was before, and that's what happens with a regular setting sleeve as well. So your pattern should lie really nice and flat. All these little hinge points are going to allow that. Our seam line hasn't changed over here. That is going to fit the armhole of your raglan sleeve. This one here hasn't changed its length either. Remember, whenever we make a pattern wider, this brings this area down a little bit. That's what happens every single time. That's why I wouldn't want to do more than 1 inch. If you did more than this, then it would really start deforming the height over here. If you wanted less, say 1/2 inch, then the change would be more discreet. So let's just see how that looks. There I have put some tape to fix it at 1/2 inch, which is not much. And now the overlap here is going to be less. So I'm not going to go ahead and fill it up with paper. I would do that if I needed to do that adjustment for myself. I don't actually need the sleeve to be wider. I just want to show you how it's done. So after filling up all the gaps with paper and having a completed sleeve, you need to sort out that hem. It's going to be shorter here in the center. You would need to put some paper behind that and just straighten that out so that makes sense. It doesn't end up shorter on this side. And you can see that the dart over here is not affected by the adjustment at all. We still have the dart there. It hasn't been moved or changed. So if it's there, great. If it's not there, just ignore it. And that's the basic adjustment that you would do, whether you have a dart here or not. Remember, the whole goal of doing all these cut lines internally within the pattern piece and not towards the edge is to keep this exactly the same and this exactly the same, so that you don't have to modify your front and your back pieces. You can use your original front and back pieces. That should fit fine. This is only adjusting the width of the bicep there. In this case, 1/2 inch. In the previous, 1 inch. The more you add, the more overlap and distortion is going to be in here. But in theory, you would be able to sew this sleeve on and just have a bit more room right here where you need it. I think it's easier for you if I don't fill up the gaps at the back with paper and you can just see the blue cutting mat underneath. So you can really see the difference and how the angles of the pivots shifted internally within the sleeve. That means that we don't upset the seam lines, and this is still going to remain the same here on the front and the back. You're not going to have to alter anything else. It's just that your sleeve is going to be wider. When I'm doing a short raglan, if I were to adjust and make the bicep larger, I would continue that all the way down. It doesn't make any sense to bring it back to the original width here, because this is actually a nice full part of my arm. When I mentioned tapering back to the original, it's for long sleeves where your wrist tends to be finer, and maybe you don't need to make the end of the sleeve wider, or maybe you do. But in a short sleeve, just make it wider all the way down. Now, the second scenario is when you have two-piece raglan sleeves, usually found on jackets, usually found with garments, have a little bit more ease, some shirts, but you still might want some ease depending on how you know your body fits into garments. If you are doing bicep adjustments 90% of the time, you might need to do it with these as well. It's essentially the same sleeve, only that it's been divided in two with a seam going down from here, going all the way down, so you have a seam right in the center here. and that takes away the dart and just transforms it into a seam line. Let me show you an example. This one is very easy to see because it's a linen and the wrong side of the fabric is different, so you can really see the seams. This is a Tropicana shirt from Wardrobe by Me. Here you can see that the raglan sleeve goes all the way up to the neckline. There is a facing there covering it partially, but then that curve goes there and then all the way down over here. I've got the seam pressed open. Whenever you sew this type of curve, you never want more than 3/8 seam allowance in this area, otherwise it starts pulling and puckering because it's a really pronounced curve right here to give that shape of the shoulder. There's a front, there's a back. When I wear my sleeves, I get the nice shoulder curve here, which is actually a seam going from here all the way down the sleeve, and the fit is really comfortable, really good. I have great mobility, there's enough ease here, but that's just in my particular case. You know, in your case, you might feel you need a bit more space and you might need to add a little bit more, and it's actually easier because you have two pieces to play around with. What you're seeing on screen here is the Joy jacket from Chalk and Notch. From far away you can't tell that much that there's a raglan sleeve going on, but from closer up you can see this is a linen, it's outerwear, you're supposed to have space to put a layer underneath, and here with this one you can see the raglan sleeve goes right up to the neckline, there's a hood attached, and we have this curve going down here, a front piece and a back piece. Now what is helpful about these types of sleeves is that you can have extra seam allowance there to accommodate for the slope of your shoulder. So in this case, all the pattern had a seam allowance. Let's say it was 3/8. But on this seam, this sleeve had 3/4 of an inch right here, or 2 centimeters as seam allowance. That was so that you could adjust while you're fitting your garment. And you know, if your shoulders were straighter and you needed a little less seam allowance to accommodate for straighter shoulders, you could adjust that with that larger seam allowance. If you had sloping shoulders, you could just take a larger seam allowance. Having that seam in this place does actually help you customize for your shoulder slope on a two-piece raglan sleeve, something that is harder to do when you just have a dart, and pretty much impossible to do if you just have a one-piece sleeve like this one. In my personal fitting, I've never had to adjust for a different shoulder slope. I think my shoulder slope is pretty regular, I suppose. I didn't need to adjust. I just sewed my seam with a 3/4 inch seam allowance, and then after I was happy with the fit, then I trimmed it down to 3/8 so you don't get pulling. But it's a nice fit. What you're seeing on screen is the Midway bomber jacket from Green Style. This one's designed for knit fabrics, and it also has a two-piece raglan sleeve. This jacket is also lined, so the same goes for the inner layer. And with this one, it's harder to see because it's a print, it's good, the shape there is perfect. So about adjusting a sleeve like this to make it wider, I'm going to show you a sort of shortcut way if you need to do a very small adjustment. Say you just needed 1/2 inch extra. This is how you do it. This is another type of raglan sleeve that you will find most commonly in patterns that are made for jackets or maybe some shirts. I've sewn quite a few, usually not in a blouse or something with a light material. And basically we have a front piece and a back piece. You can always tell because the notches indicate the double or the single. And then that shape that you have there is just incorporating that shoulder dart, but instead of it being a dart, it's actually a seam. And then this seam would be right here on top of your arm, and it looks really smooth, it's really nice. And because you have a seam here, it might be easy for you to adjust the width if you just need a little bit more. If I just wanted 1/2 inch more, it would be very discreet. I would not bother cutting up my pattern and doing all the adjustments because that seam could help us here. So I would still want to have this horizontal line from one side to the other. You know, these are going to be sewn together eventually. And if I just wanted to add 1/2 inch of these, which is just a little bit, it means I can do a very quick shortcut way, and I would just add paper behind the pattern, and at the fullest part I would just add the 1/4 inch I need there, because a 1/4 inch plus a 1/4 inch here is going to give you the total 1/2 inch you need. From this curve I would just blend the lines in up to there where I need it wider, and then I would continue the same all the way down to the bottom and just add that 1/4 inch here and 1/4 inch there. It's very easy. I would not be adjusting more than that. I don't want to upset the length of the lines and disrupt the grain line. I do not want to do that for more than a 1/4 inch on each side, which in total would give you 1/2 inch. But if you needed more, then this is the nice way that I would do it with internal cuts. If I wanted an inch, for example, where I would add 1/2 here, 1/2 there, but internally. So let's just align them over here. The same way we did with the full raglan pattern, I'm going to draw another horizontal line around the middle of this height here. It's going to be below where this curve starts. In the same way that we did before, it's very important to mark your seam allowance, which is in blue over here. And this should go beyond this line over here because this is going to be a hinge point there. This is also going to be a hinge point there. And the other hinge point we're going to have is going to be here at this seam allowance over here. Now, if you see these grain line marks on this original pattern, they would be where I would want to cut into the sleeve. So if I just continue this, I would end up sort of around there, the half point of this half a sleeve. I'm going to start cutting from the bottom, same leaving a little hinge point at the bottom so that it doesn't affect my wrist width. In the case that you did want to make your wrist wider, then cut all the way to the bottom. I'm going to cut up to here, and now this is where it gets a little different. I should have drawn this before, but from that point to that point we're going to draw a line, and this is going to allow us to open up the sleeve from the inside without affecting the seam lines. So from here I'm going to cut diagonally up to here, cut from the edge of the paper to the dot. Now from here I want to cut over to this edge up to that dot also, and from here to the side. I'm going to open it up here by 1/2 inch, which is what I want. So that's opened. Now, in order for the pattern to stay flat, this is going to move around and overlap, as you can see there. We might have a little overlap on this side as well. This is how I'm going to add 1/2 inch to this half of the sleeve while keeping this the same, while keeping all of this the same, so nothing else changes other than this area being wider. So if I have 1/2 inch there and I do the same thing to this side, I'm going to end up with 1 inch of extra ease at the bicep. At the bottom in this case, I have my hinge right here at the hem allowance. So this moves and I would get back to the same original width at the bottom. If you didn't want that, if you wanted the sleeve wider all the way to the bottom, if I tape that in place to have 1/2 inch all the way down to the bottom, there's a change on the top. There's going to be a tiny overlap on this area, which we didn't have before, but now we do. It's about 1/8 of an inch, but it's significant and necessary to keep the pattern flat. So it's not always going to be the same. It depends whether you open up from here all the way to the bottom, or if it's just to the hem, it'll be a little bit different angle over here. Okay, that is how it would look finalized. I'm keeping the blue cutting mat so you can see the change. I'm not going to fill it in with paper underneath because I don't really need this adjustment. It's just so you can see how the change was done internally. Now in this case, I've left that 1/2 inch open all the way down to the bottom. If I'd wanted to keep it back to the original, I'd have a pivot point there, and then that would change how much it overlaps over here. All these little cuts and pivots are really important, and you're going to get a sleeve that has 1 extra inch, just divided half here on the back side of the sleeve, half on the front side of the sleeve. So if I wanted to combine both methods, it's totally possible as well. If I wanted to add 1.5 inches in total here, you could combine the internal method plus the little shortcut method and get yourself 1.5 inches extra without disrupting the seam lines and the cap height too much. And I think it's totally possible as well. If I wanted to add 1.5 inches in total, I would do this adjustment that's nice and proper, and then I would add that little bit over here as well, without it affecting the feet too much. And that's how I would end up with a slightly wider sleeve, and it's still going to fit the armholes and everything up there on the top. I hope this is helpful for you that have a scenario of wanting your sleeves to have a little bit more ease. You can see it's very simple. Once you get the hang of these, you can get them done. All the little cuts and taping, you can be done in about 2 minutes and you'll be much happier with your result. Remember to always just check your pattern piece before sewing a garment, especially if you're not making test garments. Sometimes the pattern will tell you what the finished bicep measurement is. Sometimes it won't. If it doesn't tell you, just measure it yourself across the widest part of the sleeve, discounting seam allowances. Compare that to your arms and see where you go from there. As I said before, discussion about ease and how much you want. Go ahead and watch the other bicep adjustment video because I go into a lot of the general concepts there. This is more about the actual pattern work. It's only a little bit different. Some of the concepts are general and do apply as well, but some extra cut lines I needed to keep the shape over here, considering that this sleeve piece goes all the way up to the neckline and not just up to your shoulder like the other type of sleeve does. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss out on the fun content I make for you over here at Lifting Pins and Needles. Bye.